Hi, Dolores. How are you? Well, I had planned for kind of a panel discussion with Stephanie Gallardo tonight, but for various reasons, uh, that did not happen. So I ginned up a new program in just a few minutes, and that one is called "Dump the Incumbents." I'm grateful to Lana Dell for that particular phrase. Okay, it's actually a hashtag. And you'll see what it's for as we go down the road a bit tonight. Let me get through this sharing and the mysteries will be cleared up. I hope. I'm pretty sure you can hear me out there because my microphone test went well. Let me know in the comments. Here we go. Okay, that about does it for my sharing. And I'll be with you now in just a second. Hello, everybody. How are you? Nice to see you all. Hi, Dolores. Hello, Dale. Hi, Shane. Hey, Joe. Sorry about Jimmy yesterday. Madeline and her scheduled a 7:30 meeting for her and other hosts involved with the Columbia series. I was at that meeting. What? I don't understand, Shane. We'll talk about it later. And Dolores says, evict Congress is another hashtag autocorrect. Okay. Anyway, dump the incumbents. I had at the last minute to change the subject of this video. I was originally supposed to have a panel discussion with 4 people, but for various reasons, everybody dropped out. And so I had to do what I was prepared to do. And so here we are. The name of this show is Dump the Incumbents, and you will see why in just a few minutes. Let's start by sharing a piece from Jack Rasmus that appeared in LA Progressives. It's called How Corporate Dems Outmaneuvered House Progressives. There's a nice cartoon. Over on the left is a Democratic donkey, and there's Joe Manchin saying no entitlement society, and Kirsten Sinema saying let them eat cake. And Joe Manchin is holding Biden's agenda in a little bowl. And there's a Manchin and Sinema mailbox. And who did this coast? The Columbia, Missourians, something partisans. I don't know. I can't read it as it is, but this column's a very good one. This past week, November 1st to 6th, this writer wrote a daily running commentary on the developments in Congress as the corporate wing of the Democratic Party maneuvered the U.S. progressives into a corner over voting on the infrastructure and reconciliation bills, Build Back Better spending bills. Ever since the 2 bills, infrastructure and reconciliation, were first raised together last March 2021, the Democrats, make this a little bigger. Ever since the 2 bills were first raised together last March 2021, progressives in the Democrat Party have been steadily driven into making concession after concession, reducing their proposals in a vain attempt to get the party's corporate wing, represented in the Senate by Manchin and Sinema and the House by Cuellar and friends, to agree to some reduced cost reconciliation bill. From an original bill with $3.5 trillion in social safety net and climate investments in the reconciliation bill, progressives pared down their proposal to $1.75 trillion. We've talked about it enough. You know all about that. Except it didn't really start at $3.5 trillion. It started with demands of $10 trillion and then went down to $7 and $6 trillion and then to $3.5 trillion. At each step, I don't recall it getting reduced to $3.5 trillion until June or July, actually. But at each step, the corporate wing of the party, represented by its point persons, Manchin and Sinema, refused to counter the progressives' offers. In fact, each time the progressives cut their proposals, it only hardened the corporate wing opposition, encouraging them to refuse to make any counter proposals. Sure, when no one makes you a counter proposal after you make a proposal and they're not willing to come anywhere near you, you don't say a word after that. I mean, when you're negotiating, You don't say a word after that. They don't answer your opening bid. That's it. That's how to negotiate. And the media has referred to this process as, quote, had negotiations, unquote, but it could hardly be called that. Normally, negotiations refer to a two-way street with both sides making proposals and counteroffers. This was totally one way, the progressives making all the offers and Manchin sitting on behalf of the party's corporate wing refusing to make any and all offers in return. It's better described as one-way political concessions bargaining. Now, by the way, this happened exactly the same way in the fight over healthcare reform in 2009 and 2010, where the progressives were making the offers and there were no counter offers from the conservative wing of the party. There was only no, 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 no. That happened before. What happens when people who run for office don't attend to history? They make the same mistakes that were made by their predecessors before. I think the progressives in the CPC now, many of them, of course, were the same people who made the mistakes in 2009 and 2010. Some of them, anyway. Raul Grijalva comes to mind, okay, and as an immediate example of someone who was there for all the failures of 2009, 2010, failures that I remember, even if he doesn't. Uh, anyway, they did exactly the same thing. I wrote a blog about that at that time, too, about how they just gave away stuff. Anyway, the coup de grace and end to the charade was the living up to the progressives last Friday, November 5th, when the party leadership, Pelosi, Biden, Manchin, forced progressives to abandon their long-held position, insisting both bills be voted up in the House together. With the help of 13 Republicans in the House on Friday, November 5th, Speaker Pelosi broke out the two bills, thus breaking as well her months-long pledge not to, and passed the infrastructure bill separately by a vote of 228 to 206, with the help of the 13 Republicans. The last point is worth repeating. Pelosi solicited 13 Republicans to vote for the breakout vote on infrastructure and used their vote to defeat the progressive wing in her own party. Corporate birds of a feather flock together, whether the Democratic species or the Republican. And of course, we all know that. It's a single party with a single bird with two wings. Pelosi had signaled a couple of weeks ago she was planning to break out the votes on the two bills, but then backed off. Her fallback position at that time was to vote both bills up and then send them both over to the Senate, let the Senate approve the infrastructure bill and reject the reconciliation bill. The Senate action would take the heat off her, but her less than clever maneuver was not to be. What happened Friday was the infrastructure bill was separated out from the reconciliation in the House and voted up with the help of Republicans. No delay sending it to the Senate to reject, or thereafter to a House-Senate conference committee to further consider. Why the abrupt change of strategy last Friday to waste no time separating the bills and just vote up the infrastructure bill? What changed was Joe Biden intervened on Thursday, November 4th, contacted Pelosi and demanded she immediately break out and vote on the infrastructure bill. Biden reportedly also called some of the progressives and convinced some of them to break rank as well. He must have convinced all of them to break rank as well, because they all did except the six squad people. And at least one of them was probably ready to cave if asked, but there was no need for her to cave because there were so many Republican votes. Anyway, the Democrat loss of governor in Virginia and local races in New Jersey and Texas clearly panicked Biden, leading him to ask Pelosi to vote up the infrastructure bill first. I don't understand at all the logic of that. Of course, that seems stupid to me. If it would have taken them another 3 weeks to get through both bills, certainly Biden's polls would have tanked much more in those 2, 3 weeks. But who would remember that next November? Nobody. It didn't mean anything. Biden's hand is thus all over the decision for Pelosi to block with 13 Republicans against our own progressive wing and push through the infrastructure bill. After having Manchin and Sinema carry the water for the corporate wing of the party, Biden injected himself and undermined how the progressives' resolve and Pelosi's prevarications on holding a direct, upfront breakout and vote on infrastructure. All the pieces came together on Friday. Manchin, Sinema, Biden, and then Pelosi. The progressives caved, and with them collapsed the reconciliation bill and its $1.75 trillion in safety net and climate spending. The sop thrown to the progressives was the commitment by Pelosi to hold the vote on the now orphan reconciliation bill by November 15th. That's Monday, folks. But that vote will be meaningless. So-called moderates in the House, already emboldened, have publicly said, the corporates in the House, of course, have publicly said they'll vote for the reconciliation bill if it is totally paid for. That means it will have to include tax hikes on corporations and wealthy investors. But if it does include taxes, when it's sent over to the Senate, it will almost certainly be rejected by that body. Of course, Pelosi and others know full well that's the coming fate of the reconciliation bill. Instead of immediately DOLing, the bill's death would be delayed a couple more weeks, but dead is dead now or then. The outcomes of the perfidy delivered by Biden, Manchin, and Pelosi to their party's own progressive wing, now in total disarray, are predictable. Not only are they in total disarray, they should fire their supposed head, Pramila Jayapal, for the cave. First, the corporate-friendly no tax hikes $550 billion infrastructure bill has passed, leaving the 1.75 corporate unfriendly requires tax hikes reconciliation bill DOA. It is highly unlikely, a DOA, of course, is dead on arrival for those who didn't see that old film long ago. It is highly unlikely any measures in the reconciliation bill, including climate change investments, will now pass Congress anytime soon. In fact, voices are growing within the Democratic Party leadership saying the party should forget any new stimulus and talk about other issues like schools, immigration, etc. in the run-up to next year's midterm congressional elections. By the way, that is a sure strategy for losing. Second, Biden and corporate Dems may think the $550 billion infrastructure bill will make a difference in next year's 2022 midterms. They're mistaken. Infrastructure spending will not even begin impacting the U.S. economy until late next year. Meanwhile, no further safety net or household-friendly program spending means little or no stimulus for the economy over the next year. So Biden getting into the 2022 midterm elections is going to have a piece of shit economy too. Third, what last week's events in Congress further represent is the end of the fiscal social spending era by Congress. The coming months will be a transition period to an eventual return to austerity in social spending programs. Well, maybe not, because I don't know if Trump does austerity. Not always. The following are my daily commentary on Twitter during the past week, November 1st to 6th, Jack Erasmus says, reporting on the maneuvers by Pelosi, Biden, and the corporate wing to force the party progressives in the House to reverse their position and agree to a vote on infrastructure. The billionaire Lloyd Blankfein, chairman of Goldman Sachs, publicly described the events of the past week in the reversal as, quote, the progressives blinked, unquote. Actually, I'd refer to it more as a total collapse. They staged a die-in on the House floor. More accurately, they capitulated and collapsed in the face of a united front of their party's leaders and the corporate interests behind it all. That's what happens when you go into things saying you're working with the party's leaders. You want to work with them. If you want to work with them, in the end, if they get into a tough spot, you have to cave because you want to work with them. Instead, they should have announced loudly on January 3rd of last year the retirement of Nancy Pelosi. Had they done that, then the establishment would have known from the beginning that the Congressional Progressive Caucus was not going to work with them. That if they wanted to get things out of the caucus, they were going to have to give things. That's why that particular move, one of the reasons anyway, why that particular move was so important, which the progressives did not make. I hate to say because they're weak sisters, but it's really tough for me to take. Hashtag Democrats, now that progressives have capitulated and their will to fight broken, corporate voices in the Democratic Party growing louder to drop all reconciliation proposals and move on to focus on other issues in 2022 midterms. 2022 equals deja vu 2010 midterms for Dems. Massive losses coming. I couldn't agree more. Hashtag Pelosi. I was wrong, says Jack Rasmus. I predicted Pelosi would vote up both bills and pass it on to the Senate, knowing the Senate would shit can reconciliation. Instead, she voted up just infrastructure per Biden's request, who panicked after Virginia lost for Dems, which means he did exactly the wrong thing in response. Infrastructure won't buy votes in 2022. No, it won't buy votes in 2022. Hashtag infrastructure bill vote tonight was 228 to 206, with 13 Republicans voting for. That is, without Republicans, it would have failed. So Pelosi blocked with Republicans to defeat her own progressive wing. Corporate birds of a feather flock together, whether Dems or Republicans. Hashtag infrastructure bill. Why hasn't CBO scored, i.e. costed out the bill before it was passed tonight? Now it will cost it after passage. Ask backwards. Why? Because smoke and mirrors, i.e. no tax hikes used to pay for infrastructure. Was the vote rushed before CBO reveals smoke and mirrors? Probably. If there weren't any tax hikes to pay for the infrastructure, maybe that's a good thing. If that turns into a deficit of an additional $550 billion, such a deficit will probably prop up the economy somewhat. Just saying. Hashtag climate emergency. Don't look now, but Biden and Dems just gave up on climate. Infrastructure bill passed tonight has only $15 billion such investment. The reconciliation bill had $500 billion, but is now DOA. Infrastructure passed first today by Pelosi, and House equals no reconciliation bill passes the Senate. Hashtag Pelosi. The proviso given progressives in House that Pelosi and House Corp Dems will hold a vote on Build Back Better by November 15th, i.e. that it be paid for, means must include tax hikes, and it will reject it if tax hikes. So 1.85T. So 1.85T is DOA. Corp Dems outmaneuver progressives again. Next, hashtag Pelosi. With help of Republicans, House Pelosi reneges on past promises. What else is new? And pushes the infrastructure bill to passage. Her promises are worth nothing, absolutely nothing. That's why next time a vote for her as leader comes up, she has to be figuratively guillotined. What did progressives get? A mere promise from Pelosi and corporate Dems in House. They'll vote on second social bill by November 15th, with the proviso that the 185T is paid for. Of course, by forcing that to be totally paid for, when it gets up to the Senate will vote against it, right? That's what they planned all along. Hashtag infrastructure bill. Mainstream media finally stopped saying the infrastructure bill is worth $1.1 trillion and admits now It's $550 billion, as it has always been. Why? CBO is about to provide an official estimate, and media knows it, can't continue the misrepresentation. Hashtag Manchin complains, Build Back Better contains smoke and mirrors financing. He's right, but so does the infrastructure bill, which he supports. Plus, Build Back Better also has some real corp and wealth tax hikes. That's what Manchin and corp lobbyists running around DC in thousands really oppose. Hashtag Manchin. Dem progressives keep cutting proposals, thinking Manchin might agree at some point, when Manchin's goal for a beginning has been to prevent all of the Build Back Better bill. The progressives never seem to get wise to that all along. Still don't. Hashtag progressives. Pelosi's transparent maneuver to add some token measures back to Build Back Better approved both bills and sent to Senate that will strip them out again. Pelosi agrees to Senate version and House Senate conference that follows. Infrastructure bill passes, Build Back Better not. Hashtag Manchin says he won't support bill till he knows its effect on the economy first, but he won't pass it, so it won't happen. He'll never know its effect on the economy. You got to follow QAnon for that kind of dumbass circular logic. Of course, he knows better, but it sells. Hashtag Democrats got skunked tonight in Virginia and other races. Think it has something to do with the president who's lost control of his party? VP who's disappeared from public view? There's senator from West Virginia on TV telling us we can't have this, can't have that, etc. Beltway dumbos have no idea. Hashtag reconciliation bill. Surprise, surprise. Progressives in House just now concede to Manchin, per CNN latest report. Will vote on infrastructure bill first, leave Build Back Better in the lurch. Guess triple teaming of Manchin, Sinema, Biden worked. With the end of BBB, austerity begins. Hashtag reconciliation bill. In his press conference today, Senator Joe Manchin suggests he'll not vote for any compromise, including Biden's framework, for some time to come. Read my just written blog piece. President Joe Manchin moves the goalposts again. Hashtag Build Back Better. President Joe Manchin, that is, just held a press conference and moved the goalposts again. After Biden, former president, last week got House to agree to 1.75T compromise, Manchin refuses again. Wants to see long-term economic effect first, i.e., he won't agree soon. That was Jack Rasmus's analysis about what had to happen, what has happened. That was pretty good, I thought. And I thought you should hear it as a preliminary to what we're going to get to in just a while. Let me get rid of that. And let me go to another fine piece by Thomas Neuberger, otherwise known as Gaius Publius. He often writes under that name as well, or he used to anyway. On the duty to obstruct. If conflict is the only route to moral outcome, embrace it. He wrote that on November 11th, 2 days ago, on his Substack. And the headline of that video on YouTube is that progressives make fools of themselves in Biden bill cave. Breaking news. They made fools of themselves starting January 3rd, when they re-elected Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker. The easiest way to win most games is to put yourself in position to block all progress by any other player until you get what you need first. And Monopoly is a perfect example of this. You can win most of the time by first buying properties that block all monopolies, then trading to your advantage. That was something said by Thomas Neuberger, yours truly. And quote again, let the capitalists who keep on investing in the fire know that their properties will be trashed. We are the investment risk. That was a quote from Andreas Malm, from his book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. And then Thomas Newberger asked the question, when is the decision to obstruct a moral one? Consider these two problems. One from the House vote on Biden's infrastructure bill, the other from the problems faced by the climate movement. Seemingly disconnected, they share a common problem and a common solution. First, this from a recent Naked Capitalism piece by Michael Hudson, who asks in his headline, did the squad give away their bargaining power, quote unquote? After teasing the Progressive Caucus for a few months by letting them think that the BBB, President Biden's Build Back Better bill, really was Bernie's bill, the Biden administration made an about face and treated it as merely a starting point to be scaled back. That has given new meaning to the word transformative for Biden's administration. It seeks to transform the economy to favor the donor class 1%. I think it's the donor class 1/10 of 1%. The 6 House Democrats who voted against the corporate-friendly infrastructure bill are Missouri Representative Cori Bush, New York Representative Jamal Bowman, Massachusetts Ayanna Pressley, Michigan Representative Rashida Tlaib, New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and perhaps the most outspoken member, Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar. The New York Times postmortem after the Friday night capitulation described how Black Caucus leaders negotiated a, quote, trust them, unquote, compromise. No doubt that was actually negotiated by James Clyburn himself. Quote, the progressives slowly caved. The no votes dwindled from 20 to 10 and finally 6, unquote. Jonathan Weissman and Carl Holtz, quote, the Congressional Progressive Black Caucus was key to the infrastructure vote, unquote. As far as I'm concerned, the Black Caucus can be totally disbanded. They haven't been worth a damn thing for years and years and years. Recall that Manny Cleaver is a joke. Recall that the progressives' gift to the corrupt corpus Dems was the promise to support their neoliberal infrastructure bill in the House in exchange for corporate Democrat support for the social programs in the BBB bill in the Senate. In other words, the two bills would be taken up as a set in tandem with the passage of one guaranteeing the passage of the other. What actually happened? Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, broke her promise to decouple the two bills, put the corporate infrastructure bill up for a standalone vote in the House before the Senate approved the BBB bill, challenging the progressives to vote it down. House progressives, including Progressive Caucus leader Pramila Jayapal, folded. All but 6 House Democrats supported the corporate bill, even as they watched their own policies of the BBB bill cut to the bone, and even as the passage of BBB in the Senate was put in jeopardy. And note, not all the 6 no votes were meaningful or truly oppositional. Ayanna Pressley, for example, voted no. After the corporate bill was assured of passage, the House vote on the standalone corporate bill is here. As it turned out, 13 Republicans voted yes against just 6 no votes from so-called Progressive Caucus. Smart money, or at least mine, says that if more Republican yes votes were needed, Pelosi would have found them. Once more, the corporatists won because progressives and, quote, the progressives, unquote, couldn't or wouldn't say no. And Hudson continues, quote, by capitulating, the Progressive Caucus has lost a single effective bargaining point, its ability to do what Manchin and Sinema have been doing, using the leverage of President Biden's desperation to get some law passed, to do something in the wake of Tuesday's losses in Virginia and elsewhere throughout the country. He decries the decision that led most progressives to retreat from the, quote, only strong negotiating point available to them, the ability to block the Blue Dog New Democratic Coalition dilution of the original BBB bill. The takeaway from this is simple. Saying no to corporate Democratic leaders means actually saying no. Anything else is a yes. As Ball pointed out in the video above, Manchin said he could live with zero no bills at all. Progressives, on the other hand, even Bernie Sanders, could not. Bernie Sanders has always been someone who could never say no. He couldn't say no to the Affordable Care Act in 2010 either. Couldn't say no. Bargained his vote away for a lousy $10 billion. I'll have much more to say about using obstruction to win against the Democratic Party. For now, consider the above sad tale as yet another example of progressives failing to use power when power is given to them, and abetting rule by the rich as a result. The next section is called the immorality of the, quote, moral, unquote, choice. The second piece I want to consider, says Tom Neuberger, involves the climate movement, in particular Adam Tooze's review of Andreas Malm's book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. For my own first thoughts on Malm's idea, see, quote, Andreas Malm, because nothing else has worked, unquote, from last July. As you will read below, the events, especially the fate of the clean energy provisions that Biden has removed from his BBB bill, are proving Mom absolutely right. Tooze ranges widely in his piece. Near the end, he writes about how the climate movement has painted itself into a corner, my phrase, by choosing the, quote, moral, unquote, his word, path of nonviolence, and especially by fetishizing, his word again, nonviolence against property. The question that drives how to blow up a pipeline is why the new movements of protest in 2019, despite their scale and dynamism, refused to adopt the techniques of physical obstruction and disruption successfully modeled by Ende Gelände. Hope that's the correct pronunciation. Ende Gelände is a German climate group that espouses and embraces direct action. For more, see here, and it gives a link to Ende Gelände. Part of the answer is moral. This is a quote. The U.S. movement in particular has imbibed a commitment to nonviolent methods. Some argue that attacks on property would only produce a painful and repressive backlash. And indeed, this summer had Jessica Resnicek, who with Ruby Montoya mounted a sabotage campaign against the Dakota Access Pipeline, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. But as Mom argues, these familiar tactical concerns have been reinforced in the current phase of the climate movement by a particular reading of history in which the power of self-control and nonviolence is fetishized. This is both a tragic mistake and a tragic misreading of the history of successful movements against oppression, including the movement to outlaw slavery in America. As Mom points out, the climate movement's appropriation of history has been one-sided. How can one treat the suffragette movement seriously without emphasizing its use of direct action and sabotage? Even more grotesque is the representation of the abolition of slavery as if it were achieved through the high moralism of Quaker NGOs rather than the slave rebellion, or the radical example of militant abolitionists. Consider the Tucson slave rebellion that freed Haiti, or better, the American Civil War. Nonviolent, they were not, yet they were undoubtedly effective. In both cases, the abolitionists lost the aftermath, not the war, and there's a painting of the nonviolent revolt against slavery in the United States. That looks like a scene from the movie Glory, which probably came from this painting. Because nothing else has worked. Mom sees the climate activists' best leverage as the use of their bodies to block the carbon-producing machine to the greatest extent they can. Here's what this movement of millions should do for a start. It should announce and enforce the prohibition. Damage and destroy new CO2 emitting devices, put them out of commission, pick them apart, demolish them, burn them, blow them up. Let the capitalists who keep on investing in the fire know that their properties will be trashed. We are the investment risk, runs a slogan from Enda Galenda, but the risk clearly needs to be higher than 1 or 2 days of interrupted production per year. Quote, if we can't get a serious carbon tax from a corrupted Congress, we can impose a de facto one with our bodies, Bill McKibben has argued. But a carbon tax is so 2004. If we can't get a prohibition, we can impose a de facto one with our bodies and any other means necessary. According to Mom, the activist should say, I am your investment risk. I am why your fossil fuel investment will fail. What are the odds that this tactic will succeed? Not great at all. The world is still the world, and the rich still run it. But that's the wrong question. The right question is, what are the odds that passive resistance will fail? And the answer, infinitely greater. In both arenas, we're watching nonviolent, non-obstructive resistance as we speak. No corporate infrastructure bill was harmed in the progressive surrender for the scraps they hope to get from the still unpassed BBB bill. And the fossil fuel industry still calls the shots in the Biden administration. It's going to take force, says Thomas Neuberger. If it hasn't been obvious before, it's obvious now. It's going to take force to win back an equitable and habitable planet from the psychopathic hubris of the very, very rich. Two says, quote, given the reality of the underlying conflict, division, and strife are not to be regretted but embraced. I would agree on both the issues we've discussed. If conflict is inevitable, if conflict is the only route to a truly moral outcome, then let's embrace the tools we're given and win with them. If those tools include a degree of obstruction that threatens the structure itself, so be it. I would consider preserving a habitable planet unarguably moral. I would consider fighting for better living conditions for the preyed upon many in America, an actual Build Back Better bill, an actual Medicare for All system, an actual reduction in prescription drug prices, all are unarguably moral, which leads me to ask, should it be considered immoral not to do these things? And of course, the obvious answer to that question is, of course, it should be considered immoral. Of course, Joe Manchin is immoral. Of course, Kirsten Sinema is immoral. Of course, the corporatists are all immoral. They should be thrown out of their churches, their temples, and their mosques. Okay. What are we going to do? What are we going to do in the face of all that? What are we going to do in that absolutely devastating, weak, shameful cave? Okay, Shane, I think there is a Lana troll here. I think the real Lana is still shopping. I think the real Lana came in at 926. And that Shane, if he's still here, needs to do a little moderating. Anyway, Dolores said Democrats only have a spine when their corporate leaders let them. which means they don't have a spine, right? They're corporate leaders. I mean, the corporate leaders don't let you have a spine. You either have a spine or you don't have a spine. I want to share something else with you now. That something is a new idea, perfectly well justified by the two articles I just went through. And that idea is dump the incumbents. Here it is. Let me get rid of this. Okay. Let me expand it a bit. Don't want to expand it to 67%. Let's look at this. Is that big enough? I don't know. Okay, hopefully that'll be clear enough. So the title is Dump the Incumbents, and I'm going to go through quite a few slides in a short time. Here are the main points, okay, in outline, not actually the points, but the main segments which this is divided into. Okay, money is corrupting Congress by using its oligarchy to stop the bills benefiting the people. We need a quick way for voters to get money out. Hashtag dump the incumbents is the way to do it. There are advantages to this. There are disadvantages and objections, and there are fixes for the objections. And that's what will be covered in the slides to come. So, donor money stops change. Big donor money from corporations, PACs, and rich individuals, families, and groups is taken by all senators, most of our representatives, and the President of the United States. The money guarantees access to, and very often great influence on, incumbents. That influence, when combined with key rules and procedures in both houses of Congress, prevents bills donors are opposed to from getting to the floors of the House and the Senate and to the President's desk. You have to remember, it's a key thing to remember, that the rules and procedures are as much responsible for the failure of progressives to get anything as is the money that comes into Congress. Of course, the money also holds the key rules and procedures in there tight and prevents changes in those. The key rules inform and create the seniority system in the House. You all know about the filibuster in the Senate. Of course, there are the Bird Rule rules, the rules associated with the Bird rules, including the idea that you got to consult the parliamentarian to see if things appropriately fit into reconciliation bills. You only have reconciliation bills at all in Congress because there's a filibuster. I mean, otherwise, everything would be subject to a majority vote. You wouldn't have reconciliation bills. I mean, reconciliation is an invention an invention of Robert Byrd, not even that many years old. Together, the key rules and procedures and the influence gotten by the money forms an effective block on what the majority wants becoming law and making the changes the country desperately needs. The country desperately needs. So, there are ways of getting the money out. Theoretically, anyway. You can use a constitutional amendment. Only, of course, that would take 7 years. And by 7 years, we might very well be a fascist state and you never get the money out. Even if it's not a fascist state, in 7 years, we'd be so far gone, we wouldn't be able to contain the climate damage even to 2 degrees Celsius above where we started when we began to warm the planet. We need to be at 1.5 degrees Celsius, and even that would not be enough to ward off all damage. But 2 degrees is going to be unsustainable for us. Millions and millions will die. States will break down. Conflict will be rife. Certain parts of the planet will become uninhabitable because they're going to be too hot. And a constitutional amendment is going to take that long to change the situation of getting money out of politics. We could, of course, pack the court to get justices who will validate new campaign finance laws. But, of course, we can't get that until progressives control Congress. And, of course, we could pass new campaign finance laws incorporating the exceptions clause of Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2 of the Constitution. But that, too, would either take too long or assume control of Congress will pass to control of Congress will pass to a progressive coalition in the near term. We need quicker ways, including continuous direct actions, creating enough fear in the oligarchy that Congress starts to legislate before the people. By the way, there was this great General Strike Summit still going on this weekend for 3 days, which talked a lot about general strikes and continuous direct actions and the kinds of things that would take. The videos from that are very well worth seeing if you have the time to spend to watch the live streams. They're very well worth watching. Very impressive show by Fred Hampton about leftists. My compliments to them. Next, you can also get money out through dumping the incumbents. So, a promising direct action campaign is one whose central idea may be expressed by the slogan #dump the incumbents, which was suggested by our own Lana Dell. The idea is simple. Campaign for the public to express its anger and desire for change in the Congress and other lawmaking bodies by following a general rule of action in the 2022 round of primary and general elections at all levels of government. Now, let's be clear about this. You all know how widespread the hatred of Congress is in this country. I mean, its approval ratings have to be under 20%. In preceding years, they've been as low as 11%, okay, at one time. There is widespread anger and rage and hatred at the Congress because it's been bought. A general rule of action saying vote against all the incumbents has the virtue that it's an effective way and a peaceful way for the public to express its anger at the Congress in an effective way by voting against every incumbent, except perhaps those who won't take money from wealthy corporations or individuals. Such a campaign could replace a majority of the House in 2022 and serve notice on the rest that survive that taking donor money is verboten, because dump the incumbent campaigns can be run against you. At the level of the Senate, if 50% of the incumbents running were to be defeated, that would be a wake-up call for 2024. You betcha it would be, right? It would send a clear message that big donor money is toxic for one's campaign because it is becoming increasingly unacceptable to the public. The same message would be sent at all levels of government. Also, when the new group of incumbents took office in 2023, all would be on notice that the oligarchy in Congress was ending. Many of the old guard committee chairs would have been defeated. A new leadership team would be in charge because Pelosi in that aftermath would certainly be defeated, and her whole leadership team would be gone with her. Most of the new senators would be for getting rid of the filibuster because everybody would understand that part of the reason why so many senators are getting kicked out is because the Senate can't do anything because of the filibuster. At least that's a thesis that's going to be widely propagated across the political system and probably would even be picked up by the mainstream press because it's such a good story. So it's likely a shocked Senate in January of 2023 would end the filibuster on the first day of the 118th Congress. And that is, it just would not adopt the rule that allows the filibuster. I forget the number of that rule. Isn't it Rule 23? I forget. Haven't looked up what that rule is lately. Here are the advantages of doing dump the incumbents, compared to other methods of getting change. This one, if strengthened and refueled by an array of continuous, policy-oriented, direct actions of other kinds, along with general strikes, promises to be much quicker than other methods of seeking change. And quick is what we need, since we probably have only 2 or 3 years to get on top of the climate emergency. And of course, we need hashtag Medicare for all yesterday. And by the way, with only 2 or 3 years perhaps to get on top of the emergency, of the climate emergency, these frickin' centrist Democrats have cut all the climate money out of the legislation this year. All of it. They got rid of all of it. They are a death cult. Dumping the incumbents in very large numbers is what we need to do to shock and disrupt legislative systems and change them across the nation. I'm not just talking about the Congress, not just talking about the House and the Senate. You need to dump the incumbents at the state and local level too. Any one of them who's taking money from the donor class or taking money from the corporations has got to be dumped. This method, that is the dump the incumbent method, isn't about the individual Congress people. It's not about the nice man or woman you met in their office. It's about changing the corrupt system in the Congress, the corrupt oligarchy in the Congress, changing it quickly, changing its rules and structures and its ways of doing business by getting new people in it who will want to democratize the Congress. By this I mean creating rules and structures that would greatly increase the influence of the backbenchers in Congress and the newbies who want to introduce new legislation and get floor votes for it. There will be many more floor votes than now, many more bills, and far less control by committee chairs and leadership teams. That will bring bottom-up change. Polling shows that many Americans are unhappy with the two-party system. Ranked choice voting, RCV, is becoming more popular to change that situation. But hashtag dump the incumbents will open up opportunities for third-party candidates immediately in the 2022 election. For people who are left of center, a Democratic incumbent who has won a primary means they will have the voters, in other words, the voters will have a difficult choice in the general election, those Democratic voters. They will perhaps want to follow the rule that they vote against the Democratic incumbent. But if they'd have to vote for a Republican to make that happen, they will probably prefer to vote for a third-party candidate that is closer to the way they think. Those voters are more likely to vote third party if they want to vote both their consciences and also stick with dump the incumbents. It's likely that Republican voters who are in such a position will vote for libertarians or maybe no labels people. It's likely Democratic voters in that situation will vote for Green Party candidates or for People's Party candidates if there are any. So third parties will do better if we do dump the incumbents. Many Americans want at least a three-party system or a four-party system. Dump the incumbents gives them a chance to get it. That's an advantage. One more advantage, bringing new ideas in, since hashtag dumping the incumbents will result in much higher turnover in both the House and Senate. It will result in more rapid circulation of elites than we have now, increasing a level of democracy in the Congress and the likelihood that new ideas will surface there. More people will run for Congress since incumbency will no longer provide the advantage it does now, since everybody is being campaigned to vote against it, right? Increasing the likelihood that new ideas will appear, and other things being equal, that Congress will be better at problem solving and more adaptive to change. The U.S. has been the world's maladaptive giant. We can end that now with hashtag dump the incumbents. Here are some disadvantages and some objections. I'm just going to rattle off there's 6 of them. First, it's going to defeat if we vote against incumbents. Some of the incumbents who don't take the big donor money may be defeated because of the general rule. Second, it may cut short the careers of good congressmen and senators who do take money from wealthy donors but who are unbought. In other words, whose voting record doesn't show that they have voted for the interests of the wealthy donors they take money from. I suspect there are going to be very few of those, but yeah, their careers might be cut short. Third, if we vote in that way to dump the incumbents, we might be throwing expertise out of Congress along with the people who have that expertise. 4, throwing people out with dump the incumbents, maybe making it harder to get things done because leadership teams are disrupted. 5th, doing things the way we advocate won't work to bring change because there are close to equal numbers of both parties that will be defeated, so party gridlock and paralysis in the Congress will remain. It won't be eliminated by dump the incumbents. And the 6th objection, this won't work because it's electoralism, and that never works. We heard a lot of that kind of talk this weekend at the General Strike Summit. People favoring general strikes are generally very down on electoralism and its effectiveness to produce change. And I cannot blame them. I think there are situations, in which electoralism works. I'll get into that somewhat later. But right now, here in the United States, in the here and now, it ain't working. It ain't working. We need system change before it's going to work. We need things like general strikes before it's going to work. When I say it, I'm talking about the normal electoralism processes. Anyway, let's go over these points one by one. First of all, defeating incumbents who don't take money. Yes, some incumbents may fall due to error, but we can try to minimize these losses by publishing a weekly list of those who don't take big money at the official hashtag Dump the Incumbents website. And also by reporting on attempts to provide misinformation about the incumbents who don't take money. Because you can bet your bottom dollar in the middle of this campaign, there's going to be a lot of misinformation about that. A lot of rumors that, maybe AOC does take that corporate money. Or maybe Rashida Tlaib does take that corporate money. And the Dump the Incumbents website will have to keep tabs on that. And will have to report on what is misinformation. I must have gone backwards. Sorry. I must have included some duplicate slides. So let me get through the duplicate slides. That will help things. I did have some problems when I was putting together the presentation, and I had to do some funny things. So, but I think we'll get to the right slides. Here we are again. Okay, the second point. We might be defeating legislators who are good legislators who, even if they take the big donor money, they appear to be unbought. My reply to that is using the general rule of voting against incumbents will defeat some members who do take money from the big donors, but still don't appear to vote for the interests of those donors. It is unavoidable that this will happen sometimes, but all these incumbents have to do to defend themselves is to stop taking the money. If people are taking donor money, there will always be a tendency for that money to influence them. Quote, men are not saints, unquote. I should have added, nor are they angels. We cannot trust that what did not corrupt them yesterday will not corrupt them today. And finally, the goal here is to get money out of politics. We cannot sacrifice that goal to accommodate the few congressmen who may be saints. The very fate of the world is at stake here. If we lose a few good congressmen, that is not the end of the world. If we continue to allow money to corrupt our politics, that is the end of the world. Next, we might be throwing experts out of Congress. Some will insist that using the general rule of dumping the incumbents will remove critical legislative skills from Congress that will prevent it from producing good legislation. Well, there may be a degradation of legislative skill if the rule is followed. But what is this skill used for now? Bottling up legislation in committees in the House and Senate? Writing overly complex legislation that voters don't understand? Using nifty parliamentary maneuvers to protect members from accountability by giving them legislative fig leaves? Of course, some skill is needed, but the willingness to legislate for the people is needed more than skill. Besides, we're going to have a little skill because many of the people who will be running for Congress will have had legislative experience at the state level and will have the requisite skill to write our laws. Let's not worry overly much about that. There will be skill in the new Congress after the incumbents are dumped. Then there's the disruption of leadership teams. Point 4. Some will criticize using the general rule on grounds that it will disrupt the leadership in Congress. The most general reply to that is that disrupting leadership blocks and structures is a feature of the general rule, not a bug. The results that congressional leaders have produced over these 40 years have been terrible. I should have said 45 years there. They have presided over the worst decline in equality in our history. They have presided over the worst accumulation of unsolved societal problems since the period before the Civil War. So disruption and replacement of these leadership teams is exactly what we want to do. That is not a bug. That is a feature of dump the incumbents. Then there are the people who say it won't work to bring change. It won't work to bring change. Why? Because following the rule, because close to equal numbers of both parties will be defeated, so party gridlock will remain. But, folks, it's not about party gridlock blocking change as much as it is about corporate/wealth creating party gridlock blocking legislation benefiting most people. That's the problem. It's not party gridlock. It's gridlock produced by both parties whose donors don't want to do anything for the people. The change we need is getting the money out of Congress and elections for Congress, getting corporations out of politics, and getting individual wealth out of politics. Disrupting Congress by defeating large numbers of incumbents will bring rule changes, structural changes, democratization to Congress, and policy changes to Congress. And then the final objection. This objection says that relying on electoralism to make change doesn't work. Since when we look at history, we see that every significant change is motivated by movements and collective direct action of various kinds. My reply first is that electoralism does work in some contexts, but not in others. For example, electoralism, supplemented by direct action, has worked all over Western and Northern Europe, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand to produce strong social safety nets and welfare states, with much greater economic equality and happiness than we find in the United States. The reason that electoralism has been largely ineffective in the United States over the last 45 years is because the conditions for its success, mass movements using frequent direct action, strong unions, fair and unrigged elections, much greater levels of equality, and also legislators that legislate for the people have been undermined by the power of money in politics. So, what we have to do is bring back the conditions that underpin electoralism that can produce a legislation benefiting people. How do we do that? We do that through mass movements demanding different forms of justice using a variety of direct actions ranging from minor protest actions to general strikes. The key here is to increasingly disrupt economic systems that work for the wealthy, but not for anyone else, while aligning with and restoring unions. And I should also say there, of cooperatives, of places practicing workplace democracy while greatly increasing the percentage of those kinds of enterprises in the economy. But second, to make electoralism work again, we need to bring mass movements and direct action to the election system itself in order to make it work again. That's what dump the incumbents will do. It is not electoralism. Why? Because electoralism is the idea that what we have to do to make change in the interest of the people is for each of us to register and vote for a candidate who has a good chance to win and whose views and policy agendas are most in line with ours. And if we do that in each election, all will be well for both our nation and ourselves. But hashtag dump the incumbents does not assume that. Instead, it assumes that the electoral system won't work to produce such results because it has been corrupted by money and now works to re-elect incumbents who will do the donors' bidding rather than the people's bidding. Hashtag dump the incumbents is direct action against such a system. It's designed to disrupt the flow of money to candidates and its influence over them. Hashtag dump the incumbents is not about pursuing electoralism. It's about disrupting electoralism by getting people to vote against big money in politics, by firing all the legislators who take that money without discrimination. It is about making that money and its influence over incumbents toxic to those incumbents, so that money will be driven out of politics by voters to be replaced by the demands of people expressed through mass movements, protest activities, general strikes, unions, alternative media, and people's pressure campaigns on legislators across the board. It is about creating the primacy of bottom up politics in America and the end of political oligarchy. It is the general strike of voters against money in politics. So, I hope you liked that piece. I certainly liked actually delivering it to you. I don't know why it's not on the screen anymore. I will take that away so only I am on. And I will move to go over your comments as usual. Oh, okay. Okay, I went through some of the early comments, so I'm going to start here at K. Ryan says, Dems always do the wrong thing after they are elected. We need another progressive party. And hashtag dump the incumbents might give us one. Holly Horn says, agree, Kay. Thank you, Holly. Holly Horn says, they got nothing. And Holly Horn says, why, WK? And Kay says, yep, Holly. Dazzling with smoke and mirrors. Exactly, Holly. But Petzel logic? Petzel or pretzel? And Kay Ryan says, I guess we should expect that out of Biden. We needed Bernie.
I said yes to unions.
We did need Bernie. We did need Bernie, but we did not get Bernie. Part of the reason because Bernie did not fight hard enough. He didn't fight hard enough. And the real Anna says, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. How do I know that's the real learner? But Lana, I should say. Because I know Lana's color. So I know who the real Lana is. Holly Holland says, Biden promised nothing would fundamentally change. Yep, and he was right. He kept that promise. No kidding about fools, Holly Horn said. We need those 6 who voted no to be running this party in this country. No, we don't, Kay, because those 6 had the power to get rid of Pelosi on January 3rd, and they declined to exert that power. So those 6 are pretty good, but they're not good enough. Let us pray that 2022 will deliver new incumbents for us who are better than they are, stronger than they are, who, having watched their own caving, because remember, their 6 votes were thought to always be needed at the start. They could have acted as a body early on. First of all, to block voting down $15 an hour in the American Rescue Act. And after that, they could have served notice to people. If the reconciliation bill is less than $7 trillion, we're going to vote against it. You better have a $7 trillion bill, or don't come crawling to us for votes. They should have said that from the get-go. And they should have gotten more and more of the CPC to climb on that particular bandwagon. And then we wouldn't have this BS result that we have now. And Dolores says, hashtag evict Pelosi, hashtag dump Pelosi. Well, yes, Pelosi is an incumbent. She's the chief incumbent to dump. But it's not enough to have a campaign just to dump her. We want money out of politics. We got to dump them all. Everyone who takes the money. Hashtag evict Congress is a popular hashtag. Yes, but it's not as accurate as dump the incumbents is. That is a really good hashtag that Lana got for us. Kay says, works for me, Dolores. Dolores says, power to the people. Kay says, yes. Dolores says, Democrats only have a spot and their corporate leaders let them. Exactly. We are still fighting for fair voting districts here in Ohio, so sick of this BS. By the way, another advantage of the dump the incumbents bill is that their voter suppression will not be so effective. It will not be so effective. Because dump the incumbents is a general rule. It's going to get rid of incumbent Democrats. It's going to get rid of incumbent Republicans. The incumbents are going to lose. Casey has been watching those strike videos. Me too. Lana says, hashtag vacate the chair, hashtag dump the incumbents. And Bonnie says, yes, too. Dolores says, I agree, Lana.
That was yes to unions.
And Dolores says, hashtag clean the House, hashtag clean the Senate. Jerry Vassalatos suggested clean the zoo in 2022. I like that one too, but it's a little mysterious. Dolores Pierce says hashtag scrub them out. And Ramona says, can we get hashtag MMT candidates to replace the incumbents and dump the incumbents? We should make every effort to do that, but that's a separate campaign. That can't be a part of the dump the incumbents campaign. But it can be a separate campaign. And maybe it can get us 10 or 15 or 20 MMT candidates. That would be wonderful, Ramona. Lana says, go Ramona. So, folks, this was my first public introduction of the Dump the Incumbents campaign. with a formal presentation. I'll be refining it as I go along. I'll be coming back with more live streams about this. I'll be trying to get critical evaluations of what I've suggested in order to improve what I've suggested. But what I want to do is over the next month, I would like to organize a very substantial Twitter team to support tweets about dump the incumbents in 2022 to try to gin up that campaign and make it go viral. I hope you all will help me. I noticed tonight that we are missing some of our most powerful people on Twitter. Well, they'll be hearing about this again. Hope you like this. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any questions at this point, I'll wait a moment for you to gin them up. And meanwhile, I'll drink a little bit of wine. And here's to everybody tonight. We're going to need that luck. Kay says, great discussion, everybody. Love you all. Oh, my daughter evidently liked my video, Dump the Incumbents. That's always good news. Okay, then, it looks like there aren't really that many questions. So I hope this indicates that my line of logic was crystal clear. I always hope for crystal clarity. Okay, but at this point, I wish you a great weekend, or rest of weekend. Okay, and Bonnie and I will sign off for the night. I'll see you on Tuesday, and hopefully my co-host will be back. Thank you very much for coming. Good night, all. Good night, all indeed.